Are you surviving or are you thriving? What does it look like when you are faced with burnout, stress, overwhelm, and what are your factors of resiliency? We are talking about all that and more with Kate Snowise today on the Mindrise podcast. Kate is an executive coach and the founder of Thrive.how. Her coaching programs focus on resilience, well-being, leadership, and personal development. She's got a background in organizational psychology and a sweet accent from New Zealand. So you guys are in for a treat for today. Kate is also the host of Here to Thrive podcast, wildly popular, and her thoughts have been featured in the Huffington Post, Forbes, and Fast Company. So put your earbuds in, dive in, get ready as we talk about surviving versus thriving and what it means to truly be resilient in the face of stress. All right, guys. So I am over the moon excited to have Kate Snowise on with us today. And we're going to be talking so much about, not only the concepts around thriving and what it means to have that CEO, that C-suite mindset, but what it means to take a leap and to have an idea of what we want in the world and actually go for it. So Kate, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So for people who don't know you, right, and of course we've got our formal bio, but I'd love to hear, tell us about you, tell us about your business. What do you do?
So I am an executive and professional coach, and the majority of my business is coaching, but I also do keynotes and workshops on burnout, resilience, and well-being. So that really makes up the majority of my paid work. I also have a podcast and a sort of personal development sphere of my business as well.
I love it. I love it. Well, and you make a good point. Burnout's an important topic that I think that we all experience at different points in time. I would love for you to share with everybody about your podcast because it has, one of my very favorite words that I think that we forget when it comes to going through life. We tend to spend more time in surviving than thriving.
For sure. And it's interesting you bring that up because I think for me, the concepts go together. If we're spending our time running away from stress and burnout, it's very, very hard to really thrive. But if we're more intentional with how we live our lives, I think that we can take what I call that upper path and live thriving lives. And stress is one of the things that holds us back from that ability to live into our fullest expression of self. And so it's part of my mission to kind of help lower that barrier so that we can open ourselves up to possibility and what really can our lives look like if we're not constantly living just treading water in survival mode, right. which I've been there, and most of us know what that feels like. And how hard it can be to kind of pull yourself up out of that too and get onto that more intentional path. It's not always easy.
Right. Well, but give us a little bit of the behind the scenes, why thriving? Why were you drawn to thriving being what you wanted to hang your hat on that was important to you?
So I think it goes all the way back. So
take us back.
When I go all the way back, I'm 39 now, so it feels like forever ago when I was deciding what I wanted to do at college, right? But I decided I wanted to study psychology, thought I wanted to be a clinical psychologist, and then kind of was getting into that post-grad psychology, which is obviously required if you want to make a career out of it. And I was looking around at these different sort of realms of psychology in New Zealand, which is where I'm from. And it was just at the infancy of positive psychology. And I found my way into what's called Industrial and Organizational Psychology. So that is the business side of psychology. And the whole field is about people, performance, organizations. And so I immediately sort of pivoted into that form of psychology. And so my entire career has really been about helping people flourish or reach their potential, own their strengths. And so that was kind of like in my infancy, that's of my career, that's kind of where I pivoted. But then there's also the personal journey, right? That I moved to the States 8.5 years ago, and I was a stay-at-home mom for a couple of years when I got here. And I think it's hilarious that they refer to burnout as an organizational phenomenon, because I'm like, the most burned out in my life was when I had 2 babies under 2 in a new country, suffering from massive culture shock, unsure about where I wanted to take my career. And I've kind of never felt more overwhelmed and stressed out in my life. And it was in those kind of quiet moments, well, not so quiet actually, because if anyone has 2 babies under 2, you know, it's not that quiet. But literally it was the moments on like my playroom floor. I can remember watching an episode of Super Soul Sunday, and it was the episode that had Marston Kipp, Gabrielle Bernstein, and Marie Forleo on it. And I can remember seeing that, and they were the leaders of the next generation, they were being called. And I just had one of those light bulb moments, actually. And I was like, well, why aren't I contributing to this? Why am I not doing something like this? If they can do it, I can too, which, perhaps arrogant at the time, but it was useful motivation. And so that's when I started my business. And that's when I started sort of playing in this sphere, if you like. And so thriving's a natural focus for me, when that's the field of psychology that I'd always been in. But the beauty was, right, I got to thrive alongside it by chasing my passions and pursuing my dreams, which really helped me be more intentional with my life too.
Right. And I love the perspective of we have these 2 things happening at once. One, we've got, total change from culture shock to family and I imagine you didn't like roll in here with a bunch of support that came with you from New Zealand.
Nope. Right? It was chaos there for a second, right? Like my whole life had been turned upside down. So
Sure, absolutely. And it was all for good things, but nonetheless, like it can also bring about chaos. And at the same time, so it's like we're having the burnout from that energy, I don't want to say drain, but expenditure, right? When we're outputting so much energy. And then you see this Super Soul Sunday episode, right? We have those moments, and I like to think of them as like that aha moment. Where it's just like, why aren't I contributing?
Right. It totally was. And I feel like the aha moment is perfect when you talk about Oprah, right? Like it was a light bulb moment for me. It was like, I can't even explain it, but it was like something shifted in me instantaneously. Like, like I'm sure like if we ever see our lives played back on a movie screen, that'll be one of those pivotal moments where I'll be like, yep, that's where it shifted. That's where it changed. And I suddenly thought, why not? Why not go after something else? Why not create something myself? Right.
I remember that moment for myself. I was on a retreat, and everyone kept introducing themselves as a coach. I'm a coach. And it's a room of 50 women. And I was introducing myself as a psychotherapist at the time. And I thought to myself, wait a second, these people seem lit up, alive, like they have freedom of their time. They have their own businesses. Like I'll have what she's having, like my total, Harry met Sally moment where it's just like, yeah, yes, absolutely. So I'm with you.
That's when you were like, oh, I must be a coach. I'm hanging out with all of these coaches.
Right. But of course, there was also the 2 things happening at the same time. I think that, and speaking also with someone with a mental health background, in that realm of how we're wired, like we're all wired. And for everybody who's listening, we're all biologically wired. It doesn't matter like what age if you're from the, outback of the Serengeti, or you're from, Canton, Ohio, everybody is biologically wired to seek pleasure and avoid pain. Right. So, at that moment we would say like, okay, you had the energy expenditure and drain of burnout happening. And that like, I want this, like, I want to help this. I want to contribute to this. And the same thing for me. It was just like, wow, like these people seem alive. I want to be these people. But that was also in contrast to feeling burnt out and exhausted in the work that I was doing at the time.
Right. And I mean, I often talk about with my clients, you know, it's like that white rope moment. Like, what is going to pull me out of this feeling? And I truly believe that so much of that is turning towards what does bring us joy. And for
Mm.
whatever reasons we haven't been able to, or we haven't allowed ourselves to. But for me, it was this huge process of reconnecting with what really lit my soul on fire, which I threw into a business.
I love it. I love it. It's so funny. Even as you're talking about this, it's taking me right back to that retreat. And now that you said it, it totally went out of my mind until now. I was coming back home from that retreat and I sat there and I was reading, and I don't know if you're familiar with Danielle Laporte.
I am.
Oh, such a big fan of hers. I have a big fat girl crush on her. And her book Firestarter
Yeah.
Sessions. And
Yeah.
I was reading that in the airport after finishing up this retreat, and I felt electric and alive and lit up.
Yes.
So I'd love to hear from you. What are your thoughts on, like, if we're in that stuck space? And I hear what you're saying, like the white rope, and we all want to, like, when we're at the bottom of that
Mhm.
hole, we all just want to like look up and magically see this like rope come down and we just get pulled out. But like, can you talk to us about how do we get out of stuck or burnt out or overwhelmed from just like merely surviving to actually grabbing the rope, trusting that that rope can hold our weight? Because I think that's probably part of it too, right, Kate? Like, it's
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Like, if
yeah,
I really put my whole weight on this rope, will it hold me?
right, right, right. I know I'm asking you like 12 questions at once.
No,
I
I love
can't help
it.
myself.
Like,
But
how do we get ourselves out of it? I'm a,
yeah.
with my clients, I always start with what I call is self-discovery, because I'm a coach that believes that we all have the answers we seek. It's not my job to give you answers. You're the best guide you can be towards the life and the potential you have. You already know what you want, you just may not be able to articulate it. And so I see my job as a coach as sort of being a catalyst to help you discover your own truth and get language for that, to really get yourself grounded and self-trusting so that you can start to see the path ahead of you illuminated. Because without that self knowledge, like as we talked about at the start of the podcast, without being able to know where you're going, without having vision, it's very hard to be able to pull yourself up, because if you don't know where you're going, you just tend to stagnate. And so I really believe that it starts with self discovery. And then the more you discover and dive into yourself, it's like the fog starts to clear and your unique path starts to open up ahead of you. And as a coach, I'm here just to put some scaffolding around you and hold the space and create that security as you're learning to sort of pull yourself back up that rope and towards what really is going to bring you alive. Because the truth is, I do think that burnout means in some way we're out of alignment. And uh, really, I think emotions or our emotional experience is, I like to take a curious approach to that and be like, what is this highlighting for me? Like, why are the warning lights going off on my dashboard? But we have to make the space to have that conversation with ourselves. And most of our lives are so crazy that people don't have that space built in anymore. So that's where I advocate that people should start, is really in creating and deepening their self knowledge, creating the space for it, and deepening and knowing yourself.
I agree completely. And it's interesting because, and I'd be so interested in your perspective on it, but I felt like in the very beginning of the quarantine hitting the entire globe, right? We were in such massive shift that we weren't necessarily going internal. We were just trying to deal with all the external changing, shifting, moving parts. And then as we settled into, okay, I live in these four walls now, right? And sure, there was a lot of different fear that was happening at the time, but I think that a lot of people had to sit with themselves. I know I had to, Whereas my pre-quarantine life was every single month or more, once or twice a month, I would be flying to speak somewhere. So I was always like putting life back together when I would get home or preparing to leave again. So there was a lot of busy or, busy with, and we have a bevy of things, whether it's soccer games or dinner parties or other people's drama. Like we just, walking the dog, we keep ourselves very busy. But I think that without our busy, we had to look at ourselves. And I know that what I witnessed was a lot of things coming up for people that they might not have anticipated. Would you say that you would share any of that perspective, or like what were some of your thoughts around how people started like to the process of self-awareness or even self-healing and wanting to thrive more, get out of that burnout cycle through maybe quarantine as a catalyst? I don't know.
Well, I think that we all went through something that was chaotic and crazy, like coming back to my own sort of impetus for wanting to do something different was that my life got thrown upside down. And I think that was a shared experience with COVID. And look at the Great Resignation that's just recently been happening, right? Like all of the business magazines are talking about how everyone's quitting their jobs. And that's because I think so many people have just awakened to the fact that maybe they don't want to go back to the life they had, or that they might be able to choose a different way of living and working. And so I do think that difficult situations, whether that's, in our lives or whatever it might be, often become the starting point for exploration. And so, yeah, I've definitely had clients that have come to me more recently and been like, I don't know, but this doesn't fit anymore. And I don't know what does, but I know it's not this, that what I call that liminal space, or that space in between, where you just know that this isn't it, but you have no idea what you want, which is the scariest place in the world to be honest. It's almost nicer to be numb to the fact that like, oh, well, whatever, this is just fine, to really start that awakening process of, this isn't it, can be really nerve-wracking. And I do think COVID helped many people kind of hasten that journey back to themselves, which I think is ultimately a great thing. But in terms of my own coping with COVID, and I think, here I am talking about this stuff, I'm as prone as anyone else to falling into the trap of overwhelm. I swear we study what we most need to, we teach what we most need to learn. So I'm constantly still learning in this space. And one of my favorite go-tos when I get overwhelmed is to totally numb out. I just look for ways that I can just be like, la, 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 la. And COVID was crazy there for a second. And I do think many of us turn towards like bad behaviors to try and just keep ourselves above ground, right? Like I personally was drinking far more wine than I usually do. And just simple behaviors like that I think really that if you stay in these sort of bad behavior or coping traps, over time, they really start to undermine your well-being and pull you back down into that sort of hole, if you like. Right. And that's why I also advocate for intentionality, right? You have to watch yourself and you have to be considered about how you're showing up in the world, because as I say, our default programming, it'll sneak up and bite us on the butt. And so, I've definitely had to be conscious about my own sort of maladaptive coping behaviors that can really sort of sneak up and surprise you when the pressure comes on as well.
Yeah. Well, why do you think that we do go to these like quote unquote bad behaviors? I know that some of mine, and you said like for you it was like, more wine than you would usually have. For me, it would be like extra snacking or like late night, like I'd be up late. Right. Yeah. Oh yeah.
All the endless Facebook scroll, right?
Oh my gosh. Which I know is not healthy.
But we do it for immediate relief, right? And so, like I say, all of the maladaptive coping behaviors, they provide instantaneous relief or distraction. And I think one of the best questions we can ask ourselves when we catch ourselves perhaps doing things that aren't sort of supporting us is really just checking in and going, will my future self thank me for this? Like, will my future self be grateful? Because it's not self-care if your future self is going to be like, why did you do that? But it's the reason we fall into those traps is we're human, right? Like there's nothing, we're just human. And sometimes we just want an immediate hit of relief. And it feels easier in the short term to watch 5 more episodes of your favorite show rather than getting sleep. So yeah, it's just because we're human.
I know. And then the future self, which is just tomorrow self.
Tomorrow self. Yeah.
Not happy with you. Yeah.
Oh.
It's true. It's true. Absolutely. So shifting gears a little bit, I know that in your work, you really are geared toward organizations, especially like connecting with CEOs, C-suite people who are leading others. So I think that a lot of times there's something that's so sexy, yeah, at least culturally, there's something so sexy about leadership, and there's something so sexy about like, well, adopting a CEO mindset. But what does that actually mean? Because as far as I'm concerned, everybody puts their pants on like one leg at a time. But there's certainly a certain mindset that can be embraced by somebody who is in a leadership position. So I'd love to get your take on all that.
I think, well, I always say that you can't be a good leader to other people if you can't lead yourself, right? So I think outstanding leadership starts with phenomenal self-leadership. And so when I talk about, there's key themes in my work, right? So if you know yourself, you're going to be a more authentic and genuine leader. And each of us have different styles, as you were saying earlier. And I come from a strong background in personality and understanding that. And so I don't advocate that there's one way to lead effectively. It's about being authentic to our natural strengths and really leading from our natural edge, if you like. But in terms of, especially when I'm thinking of some of my coaching clients, buzz phrase, executive presence, like what does it mean to have executive presence? And I think so much of that comes down to just confidence. And I know imposter syndrome gets sort of thrown around a lot, but it's about this, and I would take it deeper and say it's about the beliefs that we hold deep down about whether or not we feel we can command, if you like, it's not the best word, but we can hold that position, hold that responsibility. It's no different to the online coach who is doing really well, right? It's like the ones that make it, for lack of a better way to put it, are the ones that believe they can hold that energy. And I think the same thing is true of a CEO or any executive leader. Like, what kind of presence do you hold when you walk into a room, and do you deep down believe that that's where you should be in the organization?
Right. Well, I think that self-belief also ties into that white rope concept. Where do we get this ability to either trust or to know, okay, this rope's got me. All right. I'm going to go and like climb the whole thing, or I'm just going to like wait till it pulls me up. And the same thing on the other hand with having that executive presence, that belief in yourself, because sometimes we have this belief in like, okay, I like, oh yeah, making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, I've got this, hands down, I'm going to crush it, right? You want me to make a beef bourguignon? Oh, well, I got this recipe book and I've got the right ingredients. So yeah, I can make it. Like, here goes nothing, right? So
right.
I think there may be even like different degrees of believing in yourself or self-trust. I'm curious what you think about that.
Totally. I mean, I'm a believer that the only way to really generate self-belief or self-trust is to do things that make you uncomfortable, because you never know if that rope can hold you unless you tug on it. And like I always say, like everything I do crap scared. Like I'm like freaking out. I mean, do I go up on stage and speak to a big group of people and say like, oh, I'm freaking out, like I'm having a meltdown? No, I put on an appropriate persona, right? Like I put on my most resourced self. I put on like Kate, the businesswoman, and I stand there and I deliver. But if you see me in the week up to some of the biggest speeches or talks I've ever given in my life, like I've been shaking in my boots. But then the more you do, the less likely you are to be shaking in your boots, right? And so I believe that you have to push your comfort zone. You have to live on the edge of that space. And courage is something that I value, because it's not everything I've done freaking out. I launched a podcast, freaking out. I, started a business, not knowing what I was doing. So, and so I think action is essential. You can't just sit there and think about it. You've got to be out there doing, knowing that the confidence will follow. And that one day you will know wholeheartedly that you belong in that boardroom. But it's about taking one step up all the time. It's about just not sitting there and getting cozy in your comfort zone, but continuing to stretch that edge.
Right. One of the things, and I love how you have that perspective of like taking that step up and taking action. One of the things that I always try to pay attention to is like what move I need to make next, and what are some of those factors that go into making that decision about what move I need to make next. So I'm curious from you, like, what are some of those metrics that we should either be paying attention to? Are they, is there a standard? Is there a matter of like, actually they're all individual? So what contributes to us really not only feeling confident, but knowing what is that right next action or step to take?
So I believe wholeheartedly that they're all individual. So this is where I think intentionality is crucial, right? Like you just said, as I often say, unless we step out of our lives and look at our lives, we can never live intentionally. We're just running around taking care of whatever's happening, the firefighting over there, and that needs my attention now. And so I truly believe that if we're going to rise to our potential, we have to step out of our lives, look at them, and be intentional around the steps we want to take, the moves we want to make. Because as sort of the theme we've had right the way through, life is really busy. So if you don't make the space for that kind of strategic thinking in your own life, your own career, all of it, then you'll just get distracted or you'll do whatever comes up. And yes, sometimes that works out great. There's always the story, right, of the person who's like, I just ended up here. But there are often also the people that come to me in the middle of their career and say, how did I end up here? Right? Like, thinking of a client I have at the moment who's just starting coaching with me, and a huge title, and they're miserable because they never ever thought about where they wanted to be or the life they wanted to have. And then they get to the top, climbing that ladder, and then they get to the top of that ladder and think, oh my gosh, what was I climbing for? And it's a scary place to be. So I do believe it's all individual. I don't believe there's metrics. And I think it's really about defining what success looks like for you.
Yeah. I mean, as you're even talking about it, it resonates for me. I mean, I remember that. I remember doing all the education I was supposed to, the postmasters, supervision hours, and having that private practice office, and I've arrived at everything.
You've arrived.
Right. Everything that I had put my blinders on was working toward, because there was a path that was told to me, right? Whether it came by way of a syllabus or it came by way of like educationally, you have to do this and then you have to do that. And then for your licensure, you do this. And then you arrive and you have then
you have a private
practice, leather couch, waterfall feature. Here you are helping and I just arrived and I was like, get me the hell out of here.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. But if this isn't what I want, what do I want?
And then how do I create it, right? Which is scary. But so I believe in what I call, as I'm a New Zealander, weed whacking our way through life. So like, there's not that, don't take the beaten path, go and make your own path, whatever that looks like. You just need a weed whacker out the front of you. Just make your own journey.
I love that.
We call them something different in New Zealand. You guys can call them is it a pick your own adventure? Those books when we were kids.
Choose your own adventure.
Choose your own adventure. Yeah, we call them pick paths in New Zealand, but choose your own adventure. And so I believe in lives where we literally make the choices as opposed to just follow the narrative. That intentionality is huge.
I love it. I love it. Well, and then that's my next question, is because you've used the word intentionality for us a couple times through the podcast. So could you give us like a working definition that, if someone doesn't have one, or they're just like, that's a nice new word, how do they integrate that into their life, either through perspective or practice?
So yeah, I mean, it comes down to living intentionally, right? Which is, as we've sort of touched on, I believe that is making active choices and creating a future orientation and vision, and choosing the way you want to live, rather than just sort of bouncing your way through life unintentionally or asleep at the wheel of your life, right? So it's about choosing and being an active participant in the decisions and direction of your life.
One of the things that we do, and we have like a free masterclass on the vision map. And you might have remembered from your school days, that ecosystems theory, looking at all the different parts of our
I
life.
can't remember ecosystems theory. Maybe it wasn't in my program.
Okay, well, let's talk about it. But we really adopted the ecosystem theory and look at, the different areas of our life. And I like to look at it as the big six, as I refer to them. So our relationships, our financial, our vocational, our spiritual, mental and emotional, and our physical well-being. And, even with like the wheel of life, there are others.
There's similar orientation.
But with the vision map, what we look at is like almost taking each one of those different areas as a sphere and saying, like, what do you actually want? Not what you think that you should have, not as you look over. And I want to get your opinion about compare and despair, but like, you look over and you're like, oh, my sister has that and the 2.5 kids and the white picket fence, so I should want that. Or, oh, this person's, traveling and I've been drooling over their Instagram. So, that's what I should be doing. Meanwhile, like, your favorite place is your couch, right? And I think that, to your point, we have to really decide what our vision is for ourselves when it comes to intentionality, and then take that action.
Yeah, absolutely. And, coming full circle, this is where self-knowledge has to be the starting point, because, and going into compare and despair, right? Like, if you don't know yourself, then you're apt to soak up anybody else's vision, because at least it's a direction. And so the comparison is so much more likely to suck you in if you don't feel grounded in self.
Yeah.
And so I think for me that essential grounding in self is the starting point for all of it, because you can't live a self-defined life if you don't know what matters to you. Mm-hmm. And if you can't articulate that, then you can't move towards it. And so it really is that starting point that runs the thread through an intentional life.
Right. I have one last question for you before we wrap up. And this is going to be like a curveball maybe. But if you're a person who you've been on your path, you have your vision, like, okay, this is what I want. You create the vision board or the vision map or whatever you've done. You're like, okay, this is what I want. And you feel like it's just not lining up for you. And over, you either are tripping over your own 2 feet and you're looking around saying, like, I've done all the work. I'm listening to the podcasts. I've, only have the happy people on my Instagram, or whatever padding that you're trying to put. I almost think of those as like the bumpers at the bowling alley, right? Like, surely I'm going to knock down all the pins, but it's just not lining up for you. Like, what advice would you give to someone who is in that point of struggle, even though they're trying?
I feel like I have so many things bouncing through my head. I have seen people in that scenario where I'm like, go deeper, because are you really pursuing what you are called to, or have you accidentally fallen into the trap of someone else's vision again? And I've been here, right? Like, when I started an online coaching practice, and then I'm like, oh, you're supposed to have a course, and then you're supposed to do a group coaching program, and then you're supposed to launch this. And I realized that I had been pulled off my own path again. And so I think there's like the invitation to go deeper and to come back to self and kind of close out what I call the noise of the outside world. Like the outside world is very noisy. And to go inward and reconnect and be like, is this my truth? Because I think what I have seen in myself and my clients is we can kind of create that vision and direction, but unless we are consistently realigning with it, we kind of have a tendency to veer off. And so you can't just set the vision and think you're done. It's about this continual and consistent conversation with yourself to stay in alignment with that. I heard on a book or something I was listening to the other day, a plane takes off and it sets its direction, it sets its point, but the autopilot is making minor adjustments the entire way because the plane goes off course a little bit and it brings it back on, and it goes off course a little bit and it brings it back on, so that you actually end up hitting that destination. It doesn't fly perfectly the whole way. It kind of does this. And I think that's what our lives are like too. So you cannot stop that conversation with self because the outside world is noisy and it will pull you off. So I just think it's an invitation. An invitation to go deeper and be like, am I doing everything I can? Because I think the reality is, if you go back and you visit with yourself and you know that in your heart of hearts, you're right where you're supposed to be, you will feel it, even if it's hard.
Right. Even if you have to make a pivot, that's going to be impossible, feel impossible.
Yeah.
I know. It's such an interesting path of living a life and being a human.
Oh my gosh, being human it's a ride, people. It's a ride.
I love it. Oh, Kate, thank you so much for joining us today. Where can we find you on the internet? Where do you like to hang out? Are you a LinkedIn? Are you an Instagram? Are you?
You know what? I'm a LinkedIn and an Instagram girl. Facebook and I aren't really that great of friends anymore, but come and find me on LinkedIn at Kate Snowise, and I'm on Instagram at kate.snowise.
Okay.
Or you can find me at my website, which is thrive.how.
Awesome. We're going to put all the links in the show notes as well. And then tell them one more last time about your podcast so they could check it out.
Oh, so my podcast, you can find me there too. It's called Here to Thrive. So with the same name, Here to Thrive. And I have lots of fun conversations over there.
Love it.
Not on YouTube, as we were just talking about.
And maybe you should.
I know. Only on Apple and other streaming services, which are audio only.
We are actually going to start doing, putting clips on TikTok. I'm really pumped about that. I know.
Oh, you're way cooler than me, Bailey.
We're trying. Oh my goodness. Well, Kate, thank you so much for today. And definitely everybody go and check out Kate. That's actually how I found Kate, was on Instagram, just checking her out and loved what she had to say and just kept following. And I think that's what it's about. A rising tide lifts all ships. And if we are taking that time to surround ourselves with other people who are rising, we can just keep shooting for our biggest visions and grabbing onto that white rope.
Absolutely. Wholeheartedly support that.